feels wrong or weird, especially with a health system like we have, you should be checking it out, unless you don't care how much longer you live. You're ready to die, you want to die, you don't want to do anything to prolong your life. You're waiting for the process of death to occur, then that's one way to perceive it, you know? So, is it already on?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's already on. So, like, here's the thing. Like, last week, you guys said after the camera was off, you wanted to start doing, like, a little pre-reading on some... Okay. So, like, again, as always, I've read all three of these, okay? And so my understanding of my background information basically comes from this as the foundation, all right? But as you know, these are three newly retranslated texts, and that this original version goes back to the 70s, which is when I actually read it. Okay, so last week when I was discussing the 6 non-Buddhist teachers, I said, everybody, do you know who those were? And I said that they didn't matter. And then the text kind of explained them. And one of them is a guy that had to do with Jainism, right? That's how I always remember him, because we have Jain friends, and you know, so that sticks out to me always. So, but in the process of reading last week, as I was reading quickly, because remember I was a little behind, I wanted to get to a point. So then I went by this part here on page 18 where it says the 4 sages and 3 ascetics of the Confucian and Brahmanical scriptures and teachings. Okay, it mentions that. Are referred to as sages, but in fact they're no more than infants that don't understand anything, right? But when I read that, I thought to myself, okay, well, who are those then? Okay, and then I also knew that Shakyamuni had taught, had studied supposedly under these aesthetics. And so then I started being curious about, well, maybe I'm mixing something up here. So I did a lot of research, even though I qualified to you last week that none of this matters and therefore you don't really have to know it. I'm going to go ahead and touch on it from the perspective of creating some clarity about this aspect of the beginning of Buddhism, of Shakyamuni's life, okay? So I'm going to start with a dictionary, regular dictionary, definition of what aesthetic is. When we talk about aesthetics, let's let you hear it. Aesthetic. When we're talking about aesthetics, okay, what is an ascetic? Does anybody know? When we would be talking about the 5 ascetics, or the 6 ascetics, or the 3 ascetics, whatever we might say ascetics. Do you understand what we mean by ascetics? Ascetics are hermits, religious hermits, that have withdrawn from the world in order to seek emancipation through some inwardly derived truth or freedom. Okay? So, are you all understanding what I'm saying?
Like
I'll give you. Here's what it says: a person who renounces material comforts and leads a life of austere self-discipline, especially as an act of religious devotion. Okay, so you understand what an ascetic was. An ascetic was a religious person, a self-proclaimed religious person who had elected to withdraw from normal life for the sake of what they were seeking, whatever the truth might be. Okay. Then, to qualify again, the time that Shakyamuni lived and what was going on contemporarily in the India that he had grown up in. I mentioned the 6 non-Buddhist teachers, and I said, are you guys all familiar with them? All right, so the 6 non-Buddhist teachers are six teachers of non-Buddhist doctrines, influential thinkers in India during Shakyamuni's time, who openly broke with the old Vedic tradition and challenged Brahmin authority in the Indian social order. Now, does everybody understand what that sentence just said? Okay, if you go back to Shakyamuni's time, the Brahmins were the highest caste. They were the religious leaders, okay? Right? All right. And the Brahmanical teachings were based on the Vedas, which were even older. And the Vedas were a thought process that involved an origin of life on Earth in this environment, as well as an infinite and eternal life as its source. Okay? It says their names are usually listed in Pali. So in other words, these guys broke with the Brahmanical traditions that were based on the Vedic tradition of religion. All right? This was a new age kind of group of thinkers that were no longer going along with the standard bearers of society, which was a hierarchical process of the caste system underneath the Brahmins. Everybody's with me?
Yes.
All right, so it says here, their names are usually listed in Pali rather than Sanskrit. And so this is the other confusing thing, because they all have 2-3 names for the same guy. One's their Pali name, one's a Sanskrit name, one might be their original Indian name, okay? So that's where it gets confusing for me doing the research to try to explain this to you. Their names are usually listed in Pali rather than Sanskrit. They are as follows. 1, Purana Kassapa, or in Sanskrit, Purana Keshayapa, who denied the existence of causality, rejecting the idea of one's good or bad deeds yield corresponding gain or loss. Therefore, he rejected all concepts of morality. This is the guy with the Kama Sutra. This was the dude that's like, everybody should just have as much sex as they want. There's nothing to be hung up about in anything in life, okay? Second one of the 6 is Makali Gosela, or Makarishin Goshelin, or Makarin Gosheliputra, who asserted that all events are determined by fate. All right, in other words, they're all predetermined, so no matter what you do, you can't stop or change anything. Everything's going to happen anyhow, so it really doesn't matter what you do, okay? And that no amount of devotional effort or religious practice can alter them. He therefore advised people to resign themselves to the process of samsara, or transmigration. In other words, all you worried about was your next life, because it didn't matter you couldn't do anything to change what was going to happen in this life, and it wasn't going to change anything that was going to happen in your next life. So you might as well just wait to die, essentially, okay? These are all different new thoughts. These are contemporary thinkers that are going out into society, creating pilgrimages, becoming hermits, coming up with a new way of thinking, then telling it to people and having their own crew, all right? These are new religious leaders. Then third was Sanjaya, or Beletheputra, which is also Samjayin Vereputra, a skeptic who gave no definite answers to metaphysical questions. For example, when asked whether life continues after death, he is said to have replied that it might, and yet again it might not, denying the possibility of certain knowledge in such areas. In other words, a person is saying anybody that projects a thought process beyond the realm of life as we know it is guessing. It's not worth doing. Okay? Ajita, number 4, Ajita Keshambala, or Ajita Keshkambala, or Ajita Keshakambali, who maintained a simple materialism according to which all things in the universe are formed: earth, water, fire, and wind. Since the world is composed of these elements alone, he said, life ends when the body dies, and that is therefore of no consequence whether one does good or evil in this life. For this reason, Ajita encouraged hedonism. This is the guy that was like, let's go party. All right? He is regarded as the forerunner of the Lokayata school. I guess they have a lot of sex in that school. Pakuta Katyayana, or Kaduka Ketyayana, who asserted that human beings are composed of 7 unchangeable elements: earth, water, fire, wind, suffering, pleasure, and soul. He argued that one could not really kill another with a sword, since it would simply cut through the space between those elements composing the person. Sort of like subatomic particle physics, actually. Nigantha Nata Puta, or Nigathrantha Janiputra, founder of Jainism, who sought liberation through rigorous asceticism and absolutely forbade the killing of any living being. Now, our friends that are the Jains tell us about super heavy-duty Jains that actually wear coverings on over their face and nose so that they can't even kill microorganisms.
No,
Okay?
like cannot you sneeze. If you sneeze out, you can kill. That's like
Whatever. It's a little bit
extreme.
All right. So those were the 6 non-Buddhist teachers that were already out doing their thing when Shakyamuni left the castle. Okay, to go pursue a means to explain or understand or eliminate the 4 sufferings. Right. So the next thing I gave you then was Shakyamuni, and I'm not going to do the whole Shakyamuni because it's not necessary. I only care about the certain part of his life that pertains to this period. Okay, so I'm going to skip the first paragraph and then go right into according. This would be on page, I don't know what page of the Buddhist dictionary. It doesn't give one here, brother. They don't do pages, they do issue by issue. This is number 102 okay. Under S. This is S102.
Yeah.
Okay. According to the Buddhist scripture, Shakyamuni was born in Limbini Gardens in what is now Rumi Delhi in southern Nepal. His mother Maye died on the 7th day after his birth, and he was raised thereafter by her younger sister Mahaprajapati. In his boyhood and adolescence, he is said to have excelled in both learning and the martial arts. Though raised amid the luxuries of the royal palace, he seems to have very soon become aware of the profoundly troubled by the problem of human suffering. As a young man, he married the beautiful Yoshidare, who bore him a son, Rahula. He became increasingly possessed, however, by a longing to abandon the secular world and go out in search of a solution to the inherent sufferings in life. Buddhist scriptures determine 4 encounters which serve to awaken him in an awareness of the 4 sufferings common to all people: birth, age, sickness, and death, and a desire to seek their solution. Eventually, he renounced his princely status and embarked on a life of as a religious mendicant, which is, again, somebody out searching for the truth. Having left the palace of the Shakyas at Kapilavastu, Shakyamuni traveled south to Rajagira, the capital of the kingdom of Magadha, where he studied first with Elera Kalema and then with Udaka Rainputa, both teachers of yogic meditation. Though he quickly mastered their respective forms of meditation, he did not find the answers to his questions in these disciplines. Leaving Ragahira, he proceeded to the bank of the Neranjana River near the village of somewhere, where he began to engage in aesthetic practices in the company of other ascetics. For years, he studied himself to disciplines of appalling severity, far surpassing those of his companions, but he found it entirely impossible to reach emancipation through such self-mortification, and eventually rejected these practices as well. To restore his body, which had been weakened by the long fasting, he accepted milk curds offered him by a girl named Sujete. Then near the city of Gaye, he seated himself under a pipal tree, the Bodhi tree, and entered meditation. There he attained an awakening or enlightenment to the true nature of life and all things. It was because of his enlightenment that he came to be called Buddha, or awakened one. According to the Buddhist tradition in China and Japan, Siddhartha renounced secular life at the age of 19 and attained enlightenment at 30. Okay, modern scholars have an issue with that. This later became the Bodhi tree. That's all I need to talk about as far as Shakyamuni is concerned. Now I'm going to go to Elera Kalamara, the first of the 2 teachers that he taught under. Which is Elera is number 40, right? Yeah, Elera Kalam. This is the first of the 2. Remember, that are mentioned specifically. All right. a hermit, sage, and master of yogic meditation who lived near Rajagira, which is where he went, right, in northern India. He is said to have mastered the meditation on the realm of nothingness. Okay? He was the first teacher under whom Shakyamuni studied and practiced after renouncing the secular world. Shakyamuni quickly mastered the same meditation, but unable to gain the enlightenment he had sought, he left Alera Kailema. Okay? But his thing was the realm of nothingness, right? Then we're going to go to Udaka. Udaka, you too. Udaka Ramputra, or Ramputra, Udraka Ramputra. All right, he's got 5 different names here. I'm not going to mention them all. He's a hermit and master of yogic meditation who lived in the forest near, again, the capital where he had been. After Shakyamuni renounced the world to lead a religious life, Udaka Ramputra became his second teacher. He had 700 disciples and was said to have attained through meditation the realm of neither thought nor no thought, which is another, okay?
Philosophy?
Well, again, manner of yogic meditation of creating emptiness. Again, these guys are trying to... Buddhism doesn't exist yet, right? So Hinayana Buddhism doesn't exist yet. But the thing that triggered all this in my mind when I realized I didn't know who the 4 stages and the 3 aesthetics were specifically was this original text that I had read, but I hadn't remembered exactly where I read it, where he says, and yet the main point of these non-Buddhist teachings constitutes an important means of entry into Buddhism. They were the point of entry in the creation of Buddhism for Shakyamuni's thinking. Do you understand? Okay, so that's what I'm saying. He says, thought or no thought, Shakyamuni quickly mastered this meditation, but finding no fundamental answer to his questions therein, left Udaka and returned to practice of austerity. So it's like, again, like Anik was saying last week, oh, he learned from these guys. No, he learned some practices, some yogic meditative practices, but nothing that he actually became his Buddhism did he acquire from them. As a matter of fact, he mastered all of these meditations and then surpassed these teachers, and when he didn't find what he was looking for, said, see ya, I'm going to go keep checking it out. Which brings us to the next guy, the next thing, which is Deer Park. Everybody's heard of Deer Park? You familiar with Deer Park?
Deer Park.
Okay, Deer Park is very, very specific. Okay? Deer Park is the place where he did his first teaching. Where's my D? D23.
Deer Park.
Okay?
Looking for D.
And also where he hooked up with some of his original friends that had left the kingdom when he renounced his princedom. His father actually sent people with him to take care of him and make sure he was okay. All right? So, Deer Park, a park in Varanasi in India, the site of present-day Sarnath. Deer Park was also known as Rishi Patana, or Sage Ascetics Gathering. Here Shakyamuni delivered his first sermon. The Sanskrit word mriga of Mrigdeva means deer, and Deva means forest. Rishi of saint, sage or hermit, okay, gathering, according to the miscellaneous Agama Sutra. Okay, so if this was the place where he did his first teaching, where did he do his first teaching? I was always of the understanding that his first sermon, his first teaching was the Kegon Sutra under the Bodhi tree. Okay, this is saying that the first teaching took place at Deer Park, but it doesn't qualify it as the Kegon or flower. And Kegon Sutra is the Flower Garland Sutra, right? Okay, so I'm a little bit confused about that. As I try to clarify that, I will. He says, according to miscellaneous Agamas, which is Hinayana, right? The Agamas are the Hinayana Sutras. After his awakening under the Bodhi tree, the Buddha went to Deer Park, where he delivered his first sermon. So he didn't do it under the Bodhi tree. He went to Deer Park. on the four, and where he a first sermon on the Four Noble Truths and converted the five aesthetics. Okay, I'm going to get into the five aesthetics next. I'm not going to tell you about the reason why Deer Park is called Deer Park, because it has to do with deer, and that's not really germane to what I'm trying to qualify here for you. Okay, then I'm going to go to the five aesthetics. Five aesthetics. The first five converts. This is what I was getting confused last week, that I realized I gotten confused. That is why I did all of this extra study, okay, to get unconfused. The 6 non-Buddhist teachers and the 5 aesthetics are 2 different groups, okay? Shakyamuni, the first converts of Shakyamuni Buddha, the names Ajneta, Kundalinya, Ashvajit, Mahenema, Badrika, and Veshpa. Though these differ somewhat according to the source, the Buddhist Preaching Life Sutra lists Dashebala Keshyapa as one of the 5 aesthetics instead of Veshapa. When Shakyamuni renounced secular life, his father Suddhodana, anxious about his son's safety, dispatched these 5 men to accompany him. Together with Shakyamuni, they engaged in aesthetic practice. When Shakyamuni rejected asceticism, they thought he had abandoned the search for the truth altogether and left him, going to Deer Park in Vareshavasi. So he must have gone from that first guy to the second guy, and when he went to go refresh himself and chill out under the Bodhi tree, okay, these guys that had been with him and been sent with it to him from his kingdom left and went to Deer Park to continue their yogic meditative practices. Do you understand? So after he attained Buddhahood under the Bodhi tree, he went and found them at Deer Park, and I believe this is where this must be talking about the Kegon Sutra, the Flower Garland Sutra. All right? Together with Shakyamuni, they engaged in aesthetic practice. When Shakyamuni rejected asceticism, they thought that he had abandoned the search for truth altogether and left him, going to Deer Park in Varanasi to continue their austere practice. After he attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, Shakyamuni sought them out as the first people for whom to preach. Okay? According to scriptural accounts, the 5 at first resolved to greet him with coolness, regarding him as a backslider, but when Shakyamuni approached them, they were struck by his dignified bearing and welcomed him in spite of themselves. They listened to his teachings and became his first disciples. All right? And then the last one is Ajata Kundinya. And I will go to that. That's A40.
40 also.
Pardon me, AA40, excuse me, you're right.
There's the
32. Or is it 8? Yeah, it's
32.
Yeah, it's A32, excuse me. Okay. Also known as, he's one of these 5. Okay? He's one of the 5 guys that came with him. Also known as Kaundinya, one of the 5 ascetics who heard Shakyamuni Buddha's first sermon and thereupon converted to his teachings. Okay, so he would have been one of the 5 guys that the king sent with Shakyamuni. Do you understand? He was born to a Brahmin family in northern India. When Shakyamuni renounced the secular world, Kaundinya and 4 other men accompanied him at the order of Shakyamuni's father, King Suddhodana, and practiced austerities together with him. When Shakyamuni discarded his aesthetic practice, however, they abandoned him and left for Deer Park. After Shakyamuni attained enlightenment, Kaundinya and the others again encountered the Buddha at Deer Park and embraced his teachings. The 500 disciples, 8th chapter of the Lotus Sutra depicts that he will become a Buddha named Universal Brightness. Okay? So, those were those guys. And then I had originally because I was reading from page 18, the 4 sages and the 3 aesthetics. I couldn't find the 4 sages, so I looked up I found the 4 ranks of sages, which was that F198 that I put in there, forget that. That doesn't have anything to do with it. But the three aesthetics, which is T101, is in there. Okay, and that's here. Under the three aesthetics. Kapila, Uluka, and Rishabha. Again, Kapila was the founder of the Shmaka school, one of the 6 schools of Vedic philosophy in ancient India. Uluka, also known as Kaneda, founded the something school, another of the 6 Vedic schools, and Ravasha is said to have maintained the importance of asceticism, and his teachings have prepared the way for Jainism. So he must have prepared the way, and the other guy's the one that was the founder. All right. So, but also don't forget that quote on page 18 says the 4 sages and the 3 ascetics of the Confucian Brahmanical scriptures and teachings are referred to as sages. This is page 18, first column. Are referred to as sages, but in fact they are no more than ordinary people who have not been yet been able to eradicate the 3 categories of illusion. They are referred to as wise men, but in fact they are no more than infants who cannot understand the principles of cause and effect. So the Daishonin in this Gosho is speaking of these original teachers of Shakyamuni who have been revered through the ages up until this point in time as being very special, heavy-duty people. All right, and he's already qualifying that they don't even touch Shakyamuni, and let alone his teaching, and that they are in fact no match for Shakyamuni. They don't have the 3 virtues of parent, teacher, and sovereign. They don't represent them. And again, I go back to this point on page 16, part of the text of the actual opening of the eyes, where what is the Daishonin saying when he says this? He says, but not a single person who adheres to these 95 types of higher and lower non-Buddhist teachings, okay, which would all be those aesthetics with all their different and independent ideas, ever escape from the cycle of birth and death. They never attain Buddhahood. Those who follow teachers of the better sort will, after 2 or 3 rebirths, fall into the evil paths, while those who follow evil teachers will fall into the evil paths in their very next rebirth. And yet, the main point of these non-Buddhist teachings constitutes an important means of entry into Buddhism. That's why he's trying to qualify those new teachings and interpretations of the Vedic scriptures, which they were all offshoots and new interpretations of. I mean, what are the new schools? What are the new schools of Christianity? They're all based off of the Old Testament and then the New Testament. They're all based off of things that kind of keep coming out like the flower petals on a peony. Do you understand what I'm saying? And that's what he's saying here too. Confucianism preceded Buddhism. These non-Buddhist teachings preceded Buddhism. They actually played a part in the foundationalization of Buddhism, but not because they contained truths that led to Buddhism. Okay? They were actually, Buddhism occurred because they were the process of elimination by which Shakyamuni knew that he had to pursue something even deeper and found it. Okay? Which is Buddhahood. That's what happened under the Bodhi tree. That's what was the birth of his philosophy. That was the basis and the beginning of the Buddhism of harvest. And without the Buddhism of the harvest having occurred, that's why the Daishonin is writing this way. It's because actually, I could say it's because of Shakyamuni that I've got my teaching now. But in reality, the people that helped Shakyamuni or inspired Shakyamuni or provided a foundation for Shakyamuni to ascertain the truth that became the Buddhism of the harvest, we also need to respect them. That's why we respect Confucianism. That's why I'm telling you, if you want to understand this, there are 3 categories of people that all human beings should respect. They are sovereign, teacher, and parent. There are 3 types of doctrines to be studied. Confucianism, Brahmanism, which all that other stuff in India was offshoot Brahmanism. Get it? Anything Vedic, anything pertaining to the Vedas. Do you follow?
Yes.
All right. So everybody's with me?
Yes.
That's what I want. And then I put Myo in there. It was the first thing that I put in, actually. And there's too much that's a whole bit different. That'll be next week.
Okay.
Okay, I'll get into Myo and I'll get into some of these other things. But then, when I read, after I'd done all this other stuff with the dictionary, when I realized, I kept thinking, okay, but what was that thing that said that like these kind of helped lead to Buddhism? And then I looked back and I'm like, okay, yeah, it was this part. All right.
This part.
Then I looked over here and realized that they're repeating that same text, only this time they have number 8 and number 9 after this whole thing started with me not really remembering what the 4 sages and the 3 aesthetics were. Then I look over here and when he talks about the 4 aesthetics, or the 4 sages and the 3 aesthetics, 4 sages number 8, 3 aesthetics number 9. So what I couldn't find in the dictionary is actually in the notes to this. On page 185.8 says 4 sages. 4 sages of ancient China. Yin Shao, the teacher of Emperor Yao. So these have nothing to do with any of the other stuff I already talked to you about. All right? Which is why I didn't have any idea who they were. 4 sages of ancient China. Yin Shao, the teacher of Emperor Yao. Wu Qin, the teacher of Emperor Shun. Tai Kun Wang, the teacher of King Wen. And Lao Tzu, the teacher of Confucius. Okay, those are the 4 sages. The 3 aesthetics are Kapila, Uluka, and Rishabha, religious teachers who appeared before the time of Shakyamuni. They are part of the 6, one of them is part of the 6 non-Buddhist teachers. Kapila, founder of the Shimakla school, taught that causes produce effects. Uluka, the founder of the Vaishnashikla school, taught that causes do not produce effects, and Rishbaha, founder of Jainism, taught that causes both do and do not produce effects. Do you understand? Okay? So, all of these conflicting perspectives allowed Shakyamuni to meditate on what was the truth, and he realized the simultaneity of cause and effect. He perceived causality. Do you understand? He perceived the Buddha nature, the interconnectedness of all things. And then when he started to teach the Flower Garland Sutra, it immediately went over everybody's head, and he immediately knew he had to like pull everything back, that no way would anybody understand what he was really talking about. He had to start way back in a building block kind of a way. And that's why the second highest teaching after the Lotus Nirvana period is the Kegon Sutra. It's the Flower Garland, even though that was the first one. Okay, so it's the last one is number 1. The first one is number 2. Okay, and then we go into the agamas or agamas, agamas that are the Hinayana Sutras that then led to the Provisional Mahayana and then finally the Lotus Sutra. Okay? So that was as much as I wanted to try and go through in terms of teaching you fun facts to know. At least you understand. Does everybody understand what I said?
Yes. Yeah.
Pretty much?
Yeah.
I mean, once again, everything I just discussed doesn't mean anything. It has no basis of necessity for you to understand. All of those people precede Shakyamuni, essentially. They certainly precede the Daishonin. We live in the latter day of the law.
Yeah.
It's just for your clarity. All right? So going to page, what are we on? Page 19. The practice of the votary of the Lotus Sutra embodies the function of sovereign, teacher, and parent, correct?
Yep.
That's where we're at, page 19. All right. In the latter half of the opening of the eyes, Nichiren details his struggles as the votary of the Lotus Sutra, enlightened to this true causality of attaining Buddhahood and striving to make it accessible to all people of the latter day. What does he refer to there in that paragraph? Enlightened to this true causality for attaining Buddhahood. What is that? What is the true causality for attaining Buddhahood? It's, of course. But what is what is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is the crystallization of actual Ichinen Sanzen. It's once again, it's the attainment of Buddhahood is something that an individual is able to do, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the attainment of Buddhahood is always predicated around actual Ichinen Sanzen, having been able to take the theoretical aspect that you are the Buddha and realize it with your life and actually bring forth power from your life that demonstrates that fact and that truth and creates a new identity for you and a new direction in life ultimately, because your life then becomes focused and devoted to the law. Okay, you're the Buddha. Once you realize you're the Buddha, you do the Buddha's work. If you realize you're the Buddha but you don't do the Buddha's work, you really only realize you're the Buddha as a theoretical aspect of your life. Okay, so when he's saying the true causality for attaining Buddhahood, let me turn this off now. The true causality for attaining Buddhahood and striving to make it accessible to all people in the latter day. Actual Ichinen Sanzen. He alone awakened to the great law for attaining Buddhahood hidden in the depths of the Lotus Sutra. And he alone recognizes the deplorable prevalence throughout the land of erroneous teachings that hinder the propagation of this law. He writes, I, Nichiren, am the only person in all Japan who understands this. He's not being arrogant. He's stating a fact. It's only his teaching, the Buddhism of the sowing, that qualifies and crystallizes all of the merits that have been predicated. Don't forget, Shakyamuni himself has already said, after the end of the middle day, my teaching will lose its power. All right? It will no longer have the power to bring people to a state of Buddhahood. It will have become so convoluted by people mixing their own thoughts into my teaching. It will no longer remain in a form that people can utilize and actually achieve actual Ichinen Sanzen. Do you understand? What was the thing that occurred under the Bodhi tree?
He realized.
Actual Ichinen Sanzen. Yes. He realized he is the Buddha. Not theoretically, in reality. That's emancipation. Okay? That's what all these other guys had, everything had led them to limitations. Okay? What Shakyamuni was led to? No limitation. Same for Nichiren. All right? So, but no sooner does he expound the correct teaching and doctrines than he is assailed by unimaginable and unprecedented persecution. We know this. Nichiren expected this, right? The very first night that he taught the Buddhism of the sowing, introduced it to that audience at Seichoji Temple. The Lord tried to have him killed that night. He only got squirreled away by a couple of acolytes. It's the only reason he died the first night that he opened his mouth. Describing this situation, he writes, as mountains pile upon mountains and waves follow waves, so do persecutions add to persecutions and criticisms augment criticisms. In a time of conflict and a polluted age, Nichiren nevertheless surmounts the daunting persecutions of exile and near execution and wages an unceasing spiritual struggle for the enlightenment of all people. He reveals his expansive state of life in the following passages. When it comes to understanding the Lotus Sutra, I have only a minute fraction of the vast ability of that Tentai and Dingyo, the great teachers of Buddhism of China and Japan, respectively, possessed. But as regards my ability to endure persecution and the wealth of my compassion for others, I believe they would hold me in awe. Leaving a detailed explanation of this passage for another occasion, suffice it to say that Daishonin is here making a great declaration that no figure in the history of Buddhism since Shakyamuni surpasses him in terms of his compassion and forbearance in the face of persecution as he struggled to guide all people to enlightenment. Okay? And the reason for this is that he has tapped into actual Ichinen Sanzen, and all of the teachings of those individuals after Shakyamuni were all predicated on theoretical Ichinen Sanzen. Do you understand? The latter half, that's why he says they're really only ever Buddhas in theory. Okay? The latter half of the opening of the Ives delves into why the Daishonin, as the votary of the Lotus Sutra, fails to receive the protection of the Buddhist gods as the Lotus Sutra promises, and why those persecuting him fail to receive punishment. This is the part that is most important to me. That's the latter half. In fact, one reason that Daishonin wrote this treatise was to address these extremely important questions that invited both doubt and criticism. Indeed, these lingering questions form the basis not only of the abuse the general population showered on the Daishonin, but also the denunciations of erstwhile followers who had abandoned their faith and turned against him. Now, do you understand what he's talking about there? Here's a guy that was an acolyte at a minor temple. Seichoji was not any big deal, okay? It was a place his peasant fisherman mom and dad could get him into as it relates to a temple. So it wasn't some sort of like huge big deal place, okay? And he comes out with this thought of the entire basis of all of the validity of the Lotus Sutra is contained within the title. And through this simple practice of namuing this title, we can bring forth all of the benefit of all the Buddhas throughout the three existences. So this is a departure from anything else that has existed as a teaching prior to this. He then goes to announce this teaching. After, don't forget what's preceded this. He's been studying his ass off, going to all, Onjo-ji and all the other temples, reading in the treasure libraries and all that. He's studied all of this verbatim.
Yeah.
All right, and now here he is as he's gone on and tried to propagate this teaching that he says is the supreme ultimate teaching that everybody should abandon every other teaching to embrace. That this is the latter day of the law and this is it now. You got to get rid of everything else. You can't do a little bit of it along with a little bit of that. You've got to eliminate all of that and do only this Nam-myoho Renge-kyo.
Yep. Okay?
And what happens? From the first time he starts talking that way, the Lord tries to kill him. He barely escapes.
Yeah.
Then he's ultimately exiled to the Izu Peninsula. Okay? Then he's ultimately freed again. And then he's got the Kamarabatsu where they broke his arm. They almost killed him again.
Yeah.
Okay? Then he goes and he starts he takes care of his mom. Then he goes someplace else and he gets something going. And then all kinds of, he starts teaching and propagating. And that's in the area where all of those royal women, and they were all two fires, precepts. What's his name? The guy, Ryokan. Okay, that's where he starts to PO Ryokan. And Ryokan goes to the actual court officials and says this guy is creating problems, and he's been saying to burn down temples and even cut off the high priest of those temples' heads. That's when they go get him. They come back. They ask him, what are you doing? And he's saying, yeah, I'm doing all of that. All right, so okay, let's go cut off his head. So at this point in time, from the beginning of him propagating the Buddhism, the sowing, he's met nothing but opposition, okay? And he's been able to preach a teaching that not only has doctrinal foundation, but it does have actual proof, all right? But by virtue of that actual proof, it's only logical for his disciples to assume if you are the correct teacher, that this correct teaching should afford you some benefit. You're saying no prayer goes unanswered and so forth and so on as far as your doctrine, yet where are your prayers being answered, man? I mean, they keep trying to kill you. They might not have been able to cut your head off, but now you're all the way over there on Sado Island. None of us can see you. We'll probably never see you again. Okay? And we're all taking serious shit back here for having to deal with ever having known you. Okay? So that's why the opening of the eyes was written. The opening of the eyes was written in order to clarify, I am the true Buddha. And by the way, this is why even though I'm the true Buddha, these adversities occur. Okay, so that's what he's talking about when he says the second half. All right? In this writing, the Daishonin addresses those questions and seeks to dispel people's doubts. He states, "This doubt lies at the heart of this piece I am writing. It is the most important concern of my entire life, because it's whether I'm full of crap or not, ultimately, right?" As he set about answering these questions, what gradually becomes clear is that the Lotus Sutra's description of the votary's conduct in propagating the teachings and the persecutions he will encounter perfectly match the Daishonin's own conduct and the persecutions befalling him. This is where the encouraging devotion and the three powerful enemies, the 20 line verse, all comes into play. All right. Specifically cited as proof that Nichiren Daishonin is the votary of the Lotus Sutra are these three things: the Buddha's entreaties to the Bodhisattvas to make the great vow to spread the sutra after his passing, as well as the description of the 6 difficult and 9 easy acts in the Treasure Tower, the 11th chapter. All right, everybody understands that? Does everybody understand that?
Yes.
Okay, what does that mean? If you understand it, what does that mean? There's no reason to gloss over this. Don't say, yes, you understand it. If I ask, again, there's a lot of confusion. I can't help that. The kids came home. Kids, leave us alone and be quiet, okay? Thanks. Specifically cited as proof by Nichiren that Nichiren Daishonin is the votary of the Lotus Sutra are the Buddha's entreaties to the Bodhisattvas to make a great vow to spread the sutra after his passing. Who did that? Only Nichiren. Okay? As well as the description of the 6 difficult and 9 easy acts in the Treasure Tower. What's that say? What's the 6 difficult and 9 easy acts about? It's all about this thing that's like virtually impossible is easy compared to propagating this sutra. Okay? That's what those are all about. Running through a burning field with hay on your back. Flicking the world away with your finger. These all would seem to be very difficult things, but in fact they are very easy compared to propagating in the latter day of the law. All right? Nichiren's the only one that did that and sustained that persecution and overcame it. The demonstration that ordinary people can attain Buddhahood, the attainment of Buddhahood of evil people and women in the Devadatta, the 12th chapter. Okay, so what is that? That's the fact that, again, Nichiren Daishonin was an ordinary person. He was not revered as a religious monolith kind of a person. He wasn't a Ryokan level, whatever's that guy with that I always see on TV and he's got a bunch of big fat beads. He must be a very powerful Buddhist teacher here, and he's always on TV, and they ask him about the presidential election. And he's old, and In other words, that's a guy that everybody already knows, whether you believe in his teaching or not, right? Everybody here in this country knows who that dude is. He's a religious authority. He's a religious figure. Yeah. When he says something, nobody says, "Well, you're just full of shit." Right? They at least, okay, I don't necessarily agree, right? So that's, again, Nichiren didn't have that. Nichiren was an ordinary person. He had no temple. All right? He was a priest who said he didn't even have precepts. All right? He was an ordinary person. He had been ordained as a priest, but he lived as an ordinary person. He didn't live in a temple. You get it?
Yes.
All right, so that's the other thing that qualifies him. And the intense persecution of the votary of Lotus Sutra by the 3 powerful enemies described in the Encouraging Devotion chapter, the 13th chapter. So those are the things that specifically are cited by Nichiren as proof of the fact that he is the votary of the Lotus Sutra, the latter day of the law, that his teaching of the Buddhism and the sowing is the correct teaching, and it doesn't matter what you're seeing in terms of difficulties, okay? Because now I'm going to get into explaining why those occurred. The fact that the Daishonin is the true votary of the Lotus Sutra who has awakened to the great law hidden in the sutra's depths and is striving to propagate it for the enlightenment of all people of the latter day becomes gradually more incontrovertible as we see how his conduct matches the words of the Lotus Sutra. Okay, do you understand that? It's really the process of his entire life, not a given moment, not the preaching at Seichoji, not even just Tatsunokuchi. It's what did he do after Tatsunokuchi? Was it just a spooky thing that kept him from getting his head cut off? No, it was the beginning of the opening the eyes, the object of devotion for observing the mind, the selection of the selection of time, the four stages of faith and the 5 stages of practice, whatever it is. His 10 major writings, other than the Rishoen Kokuran. Okay, that's what it was. Makes us and matches the words of the Lotus Sutra. This teacher, the hero of the world, the hero of the world that will bring light from the darkness. That's exactly the life that he's living. That's the teaching that he left. All right. After minutely examining his conduct based on the Lotus Sutra passages, the Daishonin then makes his own powerful vow to free the people from suffering. In other words, he doesn't just come out and say, I am all this. He says, based on this is just exactly what's happened to me. What this says, that's exactly what's happened to me. On this, that's what's happened to me. Based on all these things that have happened to me, I thereby say, I am the votary of the Lotus Sutra, and I thereby make this vow. Do you understand?
Yes.
It's not based on me being full of myself. I'm not Donald Trump. Okay? I got stuff that I've gone through, that I've persevered through, that I've devoted my life to, and that I've never backed off of, and I've never changed a word or any kind of aspect of direction on. He says, this is none other than the great lion's roar that begins, this I will state, let the gods forsake me, let all persecutions assail me. Still I will give my life for the sake of the law. Here the Daishonin from an unsurpassed spiritual height gazes down calmly on the meaningless maneuvers of his persecutors and hostile ex-followers in league with them. This immortal passage resonates with Nichiren's pure, unadulterated spirit and his determination to fight on and break through people's ignorance, disbelief, and delusion so that he can introduce them to the means to achieve actual Ichinen Sanzen. He can introduce them to the means to achieve actual Buddhahood in their present form through the practice of the Buddhism of the sowing of chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. His state of life resembles a vast, glorious sun of compassion shining down on all, urging us all to bring forth the brilliance of the treasure tower in our lives. The aspect of the Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, thus come one, that is part of our living existence. It's a part of our life. There's not a separation between the life of the thus come one Nam-myoho Renge-kyo and our own. In this writing, the Daishonin further tells his disciples that practicing the correct Buddhist teaching to lead all people to enlightenment is itself the direct path to lessening karmic retribution and transforming our karma. What's that mean? It means getting benefit, creating more fortune in your life, and changing the path of your destiny based on previous causes. All right? And it is a great path of attaining Buddhahood in this lifetime. Actual Ichinen Sanzen in your present form. Lastly, the Daishonin indicates that the essence of propagation is compassion. Right?
Right.
Everybody understands that, right? Because what comes from compassion?
Wisdom.
What'd you say?
Wisdom.
Wisdom. Right. That's how you achieve Buddha wisdom. Because of the immense compassion he feels for all people, he can unflinchingly battle evil, endure persecution, and spread the law. It's because of that he can do those things. Based on this compassion, which provides him with the Buddha wisdom, Nichiren Daishonin unequivocally declares that he is the person who embodies the 3 virtues in the latter day of the law. He says, I Nichiren, am sovereign teacher and father and mother to all the people of Japan. The Japan of Nichiren's day is a land where the law is about to perish. Whoever can save the people of such a country can save all humankind. This statement, therefore, is none other than the Daishonen's declaration that he represents the object of devotion in terms of the person, embodying the functions of sovereign, teacher, and parent, not only for the people of Japan, but for all humankind over the 10,000 years and more of the latter day of the law. Thus, the opening section of this treatise represents the three virtues as the main topic, while the concluding section proclaims that Nichiren Daishonin, as the votary of the Lotus Sutra, is the person who embodies them. How are we doing on time?
9.
9, 10.
9?
9, 10.
Okay, we'll stop right there and start on page 21 next week. Thank you.
Thank you.